You signed it this morning. You didn't think about it. You just wrote it. On the form, the receipt, the document they slid across the desk. Your last name, automatic, reflexive, done. You've written it 10,000 times, on school enrollment papers, on job applications, on bank accounts and medical records and legal contracts. You've printed it in capital letters. You've signed it in cursive. You've spelled it out loud to strangers over the phone, letter by letter, because they always get it wrong. And not once, not a single time, did you stop and ask, where did this word come from? That's not a criticism. That's just how it works. Your surname is so familiar, so automatic, so deeply attached to your identity that it became invisible, like the sound of your own heartbeat. Present everywhere. Noticed almost never. But here is what nobody told you. That word, that collection of letters you've written your entire life, is not just a name. It is a clue. It is a compressed archive, a frozen message, a piece of evidence left behind by people who lived centuries before you, in places you've never visited, speaking languages you may not even recognize. People who worked and prayed and migrated and survived, and somewhere in that survival they attached a word to their family, and that word traveled forward through time, through generations, through oceans, through colonial records and church baptisms and immigration papers, and eventually it landed on you. Your surname is older than your country, older than your language, in some cases older than the civilization you were taught to call your own. And most people never look at it twice. That ends today. In this video, we are going to look at 10 Hispanic surnames, names carried by hundreds of millions of people across Spain, Latin America, the United States, and beyond. Names that feel completely normal, completely modern, completely ordinary. But underneath each one is a hidden origin, an Arabic city, a Germanic warrior, a Jewish family that had to reinvent itself to survive, a Basque word from a language so ancient that linguists still cannot fully explain where it came from. 10 surnames, 10 civilizations, 10 doors that most people walk past every single day without realizing they're there. Before we go any further, I want to tell you something important. A surname alone is not a DNA test. It is not proof of ancestry. It cannot tell you with certainty where your bloodline began. What it can do, and what we are going to do in this video, is open questions. Point to possibilities. Show you the shape of the history hiding inside the word you've been signing your entire life. I also need to warn you about one specific entry on this list. Number 1, the surname at the top of this countdown is the most common Hispanic surname on Earth. You have heard it 10,000 times, you probably know someone who carries it, and you have almost certainly assumed you know where it comes from. You don't. The true origin of the number 1 name on this list is still debated by historians and linguists today. It may reach into a world that existed before modern Spain, before modern Spanish, before most families even had fixed surnames at all. And the deeper you look at it, the more mysterious it becomes. Stay until the end, because that one is going to reframe something. Now, before we get into the list, I need you to understand one thing about Hispanic surnames specifically, because this is where the story gets more layered than most people realize. In much of the Spanish-speaking world, you don't inherit just one surname. You inherit 2. One from your father's family, one from your mother's family. 2 lines, 2 archives, 2 separate trails of history running side by side, passed down through every generation. That means a single person can carry the clue to 2 separate civilizations in their name. 2 completely different origins, 2 different languages, 2 different stories of survival. A person named Maria Medina Guerrero is carrying an Arabic city on one side and a Germanic warrior on the other. She may not know that. She probably doesn't think about it when she signs her name. But it's there. That is what Hispanic surnames do that other naming traditions don't always do as clearly. They preserve both lines. They keep 2 doors open at once. And that is exactly why this list matters. 10 surnames, 10 clues. Let's go through them. We are starting at number 10 and counting down to number 1. Each surname on this list has surprised the people who carry it. Some of them had no idea their name wasn't originally Spanish. Some had no idea it pointed to a medieval warrior, or an Arabic city, or a forced religious conversion, or a word from a language that predates written European history. One of these surnames may be yours. One of them may belong to your mother, your grandfather, the cousin you haven't seen in years, the grandmother who came from a village she never fully explained. And if your name appears on this list, don't skip ahead. Don't jump to your entry and close the video. Because the context matters. The history around each name is what makes your name make sense. You need to hear the whole story. I'll also tell you this. Number 4 on this list is the one that generates the most debate, the most disagreement, the most pushback in the comments. Because it sits in a complicated place, a place where history, language, and identity overlap in ways that make people uncomfortable. I'm going to handle it honestly and carefully, but I need you to come in with an open mind. Names are not judgments, they are evidence, and evidence sometimes points to things people didn't expect. Let me also address something right now, because I know what some of you are already thinking. This is just etymology. Knowing where my surname came from doesn't change anything about who I am. I hear that, and you're right that a name alone doesn't define you. But here is what I've seen happen, over and over, when people actually look into the origin of their surname for the first time. Something shifts. A woman in her 50s, named Cruz her entire life, discovers that her surname may carry the echo of a Jewish family in 15th century Spain that converted to Christianity under enormous pressure. And suddenly she understands why her grandmother kept certain rituals that never quite made sense. A man named Garcia, who always assumed his name was just common, finds out it may be one of the oldest surviving names in all of Iberia, potentially rooted in a language that predates Latin on the peninsula. A family named Medina learns that the word inside their surname is not Spanish at all. It is Arabic, and it means city, and it was left behind by a civilization that ruled parts of Spain for nearly 800 years. These are not small discoveries. They are the moment a name stops being a label and starts being a map. Here is how this video works. We go through 10 surnames, one at a time. For each one, I'll tell you where the name most likely comes from, what historical forces turned that origin into a family name, and what it might mean for the people who carry it today. I will not tell you that your surname proves anything. I will not overreach. History is complicated, records are incomplete, and anyone who sells you certainty about medieval ancestry is selling you something that doesn't exist. What I will give you is the honest, documented, fascinating truth about where these names likely began, and why they ended up attached to tens of millions of families across the world. At the end, I'm going to ask you one specific question in the comments. Not a general, "What did you think?" An actual question that I want you to answer. Because the comments on videos like this one become something remarkable. People from Mexico and Colombia and Spain and Argentina and the United States and the Philippines all leaving the same name, but with completely different family stories attached to it. The same 3 syllables, 10,000 different histories. That is what a surname is. One more thing before we start the countdown. We are going to move through these names with care, because some of them touch on histories that were painful, forced conversions, colonial erasure, religious persecution, the systematic destruction of identity. I'm not going to sensationalize any of that, but I'm also not going to avoid it. The history is what it is. And part of what makes these names powerful is that they survived that history. Your surname survived something, you just don't know what yet. Number 10 is a name you've heard your entire life, and it doesn't begin where you think it does. Number 10, Medina. Say it out loud. Medina, it sounds Spanish, it feels Spanish. It moves through the mouth the way Spanish words move, smooth, rhythmic, built for speech. If you met someone named Medina on the street in Mexico City or Miami or Madrid, you would not stop and question it. You would file it automatically under Hispanic surname and move on. That instinct is understandable, and it is exactly wrong. Medina does not begin in Spanish. It does not begin in Latin. It does not begin in any of the languages that most people associate with Hispanic heritage. Medina begins in Arabic. The Arabic word Madna means city, not a specific city. The concept of a city itself, a populated place, an urban center, a hub of human civilization. And for nearly 800 years, from 711 to 1492, Arabic was not a foreign language on the Iberian Peninsula. It was the administrative language of one of the most sophisticated civilizations in medieval Europe, Al-Andalus. At its peak, the civilization of Al-Andalus produced scholars, architects, physicians, mathematicians, and poets whose work shaped the entire trajectory of Western knowledge. The city of Córdoba, at its height in the 10th century, had a population of roughly 300,000 people, larger than any city in Christian Europe at the time. It had paved streets, public lighting, hundreds of bathhouses, and a library containing an estimated 400,000 volumes at a time when most European monasteries owned fewer than a few hundred books. Arabic did not stay confined to the courts and the mosques. It entered the soil, it entered the geography, it entered the names of rivers, mountains, towns, and valleys across Spain. Words like acequia, irrigation canal, alcázar, fortress, almohada, pillow, azúcar, sugar. More than 4,000 Spanish words carry Arabic roots, and Medina is one of them. Across the Iberian Peninsula, places were named Medina, Medina del Campo, Medina de Rio Seco, Medina Sidonia. These were real towns, real locations, real communities. And when surnames began to solidify in Spain, roughly between the 10th and 14th centuries, people attached themselves to the places they came from. A family from Medina del Campo might simply become the Medinas. A man known in his village as the one who came from that city might carry Medina as his identifier. That is how a word from 7th century Arabia ended up on a birth certificate in 20th century Texas. Don't let the smoothness of it fool you. Underneath a surname that sounds completely Spanish, there is an entire civilization, 8 centuries of Arab presence in Europe, of mosques and manuscripts and agricultural innovation, of a world that was deliberately dismantled and then deliberately forgotten. And yet the word survived, hidden inside a family name, passed down through generations who may have had no idea what language it came from. If your surname is Medina, your name is carrying a city, not a Spanish city, an Arabic concept of what a city is, wrapped in a Spanish sound, traveling across 4 centuries and an ocean. That is what a surname can do. But here is what I need you to hold on to as we continue. The history of Al-Andalus did not end peacefully. It ended with expulsion, with forced conversion, with the systematic erasure of Muslim and Jewish identity from the Iberian Peninsula. The same civilizations that gave Spanish words like Medina, Alcázar, and Acequia were also the civilizations that Spain spent 700 years trying to eliminate. Which means some surnames carry not just the echo of a civilization, they carry the echo of its destruction. Keep that in mind, because we're going to come back to it. Number 9. Guerrero. This one almost explains itself, and that is precisely why it's more interesting than it looks. Guerrero means warrior. The word comes from the Old Spanish guerrero, rooted in the Frankish word guerra, meaning war or conflict, which entered the Iberian Peninsula through the long, tangled process of Germanic migration and linguistic influence that followed the collapse of the Roman Empire. The Visigoths, the Franks, the Suebi, the Germanic peoples who moved across Europe in the 5th and 6th centuries brought their vocabulary with them, and some of that vocabulary stuck. But the etymology is only the beginning. The more interesting question is, why would a family end up carrying the word for warrior as a permanent surname? Before surnames became hereditary and fixed, people were identified by what they did, where they came from, or what others said about them. A blacksmith became Herrero. A man who lived near the oak tree became Encinas. A person from the town of Vega became Vega. And a man with a reputation for combat, for bravery or ferocity or military skill, could become Guerrero, the warrior. The original Guerrero may have been a foot soldier in one of the medieval Christian kingdoms, pushing southward during the Reconquista. He may have been a local enforcer, a mercenary, a man who survived a battle that killed everyone around him. He may have had a scar. He may have had a reputation. He may have simply been the most dangerous man in a small village that needed a word to describe him. And then he died. Generations passed. His face was forgotten. His specific story dissolved into silence. But the word stayed. That is the strange immortality of surnames. The man behind Guerrero is gone. But the description of him, the warrior, has now survived for somewhere between 500 and 900 years. It crossed the Atlantic aboard Spanish ships in the 16th century. It moved through colonial Mexico, through independence, through revolution. It became the name of a Mexican state, named in honor of Vicente Guerrero, a leader of Mexican independence executed in 1831, a man of African, indigenous, and Spanish heritage whose surname meant warrior and whose life made that meaning earn itself. Today, Guerrero is carried by millions of people who have never held a weapon. School teachers named Guerrero, accountants named Guerrero, children named Guerrero who have never thought about what the word means. But somewhere at the root of that family line, there was a man, and his village remembered one specific thing about him. Number 8. Cruz. Simple, direct, almost impossible to misread. Cruz means cross. The word comes from the Latin crux, the same root that gives English the words crucial, excruciating, and crux itself. In the Roman world, a crux was an instrument of execution. In the Christian world that emerged from Roman civilization, it became the central symbol of faith. And in the Hispanic world, it became one of the most common surnames on earth. For many families, the origin of Cruz is straightforward. A family associated with a church built near a crossroads. A person who lived near a landmark cross, the kind that marked boundaries, pilgrimage routes, or the sites of significant events. A deeply religious household that took the cross as its family identity. In a world saturated with Christian symbolism, Cruz was a natural surname to carry. But Cruz carries a second door, and that door opens onto one of the most painful chapters in Iberian history. After the fall of Granada in 1492, the same year Columbus crossed the Atlantic, the unified Spanish monarchs Isabella and Ferdinand issued the Alhambra Decree, ordering the expulsion of all Jews from Spain. Historians estimate that somewhere between 150,000 and 200,000 people were forced to leave. Those who stayed faced a stark choice: convert to Christianity or go. Many converted. They became known as conversos, new Christians. And in the decades that followed, they lived under the surveillance of the Spanish Inquisition, which was specifically tasked with identifying false converts, people who had nominally accepted Christianity but were suspected of secretly continuing Jewish practice. In that world, names mattered enormously. A family trying to demonstrate the authenticity of their Christian identity might choose a surname that proclaimed it loudly. Cruz, Santos, Iglesias, Reyes, names that announced faith, names that said, without ambiguity, "We belong here. We are Christian. We have always been Christian." I know what some of you are thinking right now. Does that mean Cruz is a Jewish surname? No. That is not what I'm saying. Most people named Cruz have no connection whatsoever to forced conversion. Cruz was adopted by families of every background across the Hispanic world for countless different reasons over many centuries. The cross was everywhere. The name was common. But in some family lines, and family records when they survive, can sometimes reveal this, Cruz may mark the moment a family remade its identity under pressure. The moment survival required a new name. That is why Cruz is powerful. Not because it gives one clean answer, because it holds multiple truths at the same time. Number 7. Castillo. Before it was a surname, it was stone. Castillo means castle. From the Latin castellum, a fortified position, a military structure, a place designed to be held against attack. The Romans built castella across Hispania as they consolidated control of the peninsula. The word stayed, the structures stayed. And centuries later, when medieval Christian kingdoms pushed southward in a campaign that lasted nearly 800 years, castles became the punctuation marks of the landscape. Every ridge that mattered had a castle on it. Every river crossing that mattered had a castle guarding it. Every frontier town that mattered had a castle at its center. The Iberian Peninsula in the medieval period was one of the most heavily fortified landscapes in Europe, not because people there were unusually warlike, but because the geography of conflict demanded it. And then there is the larger shadow behind the word. Castile, Castilla in Spanish, the central kingdom of medieval Spain, the political and military engine of the Reconquista, the eventual dominant force in the unification of Spain, the source of the language that would eventually be called Castellano because of the central role it played in defining what Spanish was. The word Castile itself is built on castillos, castles. The region was so defined by its fortifications that the name of the region became the name of the language, and the name of the language became the name of one of the most spoken languages on earth. Your surname Castillo may not mean your ancestor owned a castle. Almost certainly they did not. What it may mean is that your family name was formed in one of the most militarized, most contested, most historically layered landscapes in European history. That the word was so embedded in the geography of daily life that it became a permanent identity. A modern Castillo might live in Los Angeles or Lima or Manila. They might have never seen a medieval fortress in their life, but their name still carries the shape of a wall, still carries the memory of a world where stone was not architecture. It was survival. 4 surnames, 4 civilizations: Arabic, Germanic, Latin faith, medieval military architecture. And we're only halfway through the list. The next entry looks like a simple landscape word, a geographical description, a name for flat land near a river. It is that. But it is also something else entirely. And number 5 is going to make you reconsider what the word king actually meant for the families who chose it as a surname, and why some of them may have had very specific, very complicated reasons for choosing it. Stay with this. Number 6. Vega. Say it slowly. Vega, 2 syllables, clean, open. It moves like the landscape it describes. In Spanish, a vega is a fertile plain, low, flat land, usually near a river. The kind of land that holds moisture. The kind of land where things grow without fighting the soil. In a medieval agricultural economy, where most people lived within walking distance of the fields that fed them, a vega was not just a geographical feature. It was a form of wealth. Dry hillside soil produced thin crops. Rocky terrain broke plows and broke backs. But a vega, irrigated, flat, dark with river silt, could sustain a village, could sustain a family through a bad winter, could mean the difference between a community that survived and one that didn't. That is why the word appears so many times in Spanish geography. La Vega de Granada, Vega de Valcarce, Vega Baja, Vega Alta. Across the Iberian Peninsula, any region with fertile lowland near water was likely to carry the name. And when families began to fix their surnames to places, the word moved from geography into identity. But here is what most people don't know about the word Vega itself. Some linguists trace its roots back to Arabic. The Arabic word Baca, meaning plain or lowland, entered the geographical vocabulary of medieval Spain through the same process that gave us Medina, Alcazar, and hundreds of other place names. The irrigation systems that made those fertile plains productive were, in many cases, built or expanded during the centuries of Arab presence in Iberia. The acequia, the irrigation channel, was an Arab engineering contribution that transformed Iberian agriculture and whose name is itself Arabic. So Vega may carry a double origin. A Spanish word for a type of land, rooted in an Arabic word for that same land, used to describe terrain that was made productive by Arab agricultural technology. And one more thing about Vega. The star. The brightest star in the constellation Lyra. The 5th brightest star in the entire night sky. Its name comes from Arabic, waki, meaning the falling eagle, named by Arab astronomers who mapped the night sky with a precision that European astronomy would not match for centuries. The same civilization that left the word Vega in the Spanish language left the name of a star that still hangs above us. If your surname is Vega, you are carrying a piece of land. You are carrying a word that crossed from Arabic into Spanish. And somewhere above you, a star carries the same linguistic origin, named by the same civilization, still visible, still burning. That is not nothing. Number 5. Reyes, kings. The word is right there in the translation. Reyes means kings, plural, from the Latin rex, the same root that gives English words like regal, royal, and reign. It is one of the most immediately recognizable Hispanic surnames, and most people assume they understand it. They don't, because very few families named Reyes are descended from kings, almost none of them. The aristocracy of medieval Spain was not in the habit of passing their royal surnames to the general population. If you carry the name Reyes today, you almost certainly did not inherit it from a throne. So where did it come from? 3 possible doors. and they are very different from each other. The first door, geography. Across Spain,
Look at the
places were
colors, they are
named for
very strong.
royalty, for royal events,
It is
for the
lovely.
presence of a king at a particular
How much does it
location,
cost?
a town where a king stayed, a valley where a royal battle took place, a church built in honor of a royal patron. Families from those places could carry Reyes as a locational surname, not because they were royal, but because royalty had touched their landscape and left a name behind. The second door, religion. In the Christian calendar, January 6th is the Feast of the Three Kings, Los Reyes Magos, the day commemorating the arrival of the Magi at the birth of Jesus. In Spanish-speaking cultures, this feast day was, and in many places still is, one of the most important celebrations of the year. A child born on or near that date might be named Reyes in honor of the occasion. A family particularly devoted to that feast might take it as their surname. The third door is the one that connects back to what we discussed with Cruz. In the years following the Reconquista, Jewish and Muslim families who converted to Christianity under pressure or under threat sometimes chose surnames that demonstrated their new Christian identity. Cruz announced the cross, Santos announced the saints, and Reyes announced the kings, specifically the three kings, the Magi, the most visible royal figures in Christian devotional life. A family choosing a name to signal we are Christian, we have always been Christian, please do not investigate us further, might have reached for a word that felt unmistakably, unambiguously Christian. Reyes was that word. Again, this does not mean every family named Reyes comes from a converso background. Most do not. The name is far too common and far too old to carry one single origin. But in some family lines, the surname Reyes may sit exactly at the intersection of faith, pressure, and survival. May mark the moment someone chose a new name because their old name was no longer safe to carry. That is what a surname can conceal. Not just history, but the fear that shaped it. Pause here for a moment. Don't rush past this. Because what we've now seen across Cruz and Reyes is a pattern, a specific historical pressure, the persecution of non-Christian communities in post-Reconquista Spain, that may have pushed families towards surnames that performed Christian identity. Surnames that said what needed to be said to survive. If you carry Cruz, Reyes, Santos, Iglesias, or similar surnames, you carry a name that may have been chosen in a moment of enormous historical pressure. You may have never known that. Your grandparents may never have known that. The records may not exist to confirm it. But the possibility lives inside the name. Quiet, patient, waiting for someone to ask the question. Number 4. Morales. This is the one I warned you about. Morales is fascinating precisely because it sits at the intersection of three different possible origins, and because two of those origins touch on a history that makes people uncomfortable. Let's start with the simplest explanation, because it is real and legitimate and should not be dismissed. The Spanish word moral means mulberry tree, a specific tree, morus in Latin, that was cultivated across the Iberian Peninsula for its fruit and, critically, for its leaves, which feed silkworms. The silk industry was enormously important in medieval Spain, particularly in the region of Granada and across Andalusia. Mulberry groves were economically significant. Towns were named for them. Families who lived near them, worked them, or came from places named for them could take Morales as a surname. This is documented. It is straightforward. For a large number of families named Morales, this is the complete story. Mulberry trees, landscape, place name, surname. But Spanish is a language that layers meanings, and the word moral in the context of medieval Iberian history does not exist in isolation. The broader linguistic family of words built on the root mor, moro, moreno, morisco, was the vocabulary medieval Spanish used to refer to the Moors, the Muslim populations of North African and Arab origin who had ruled parts of Spain for nearly 8 centuries. A Moro was a Moor. Moreno described dark coloring in a way that was sometimes neutral and sometimes explicitly racial. Morisco referred to Muslims who had converted to Christianity after the fall of Granada. Now, I am not saying that every family named Morales carries Moorish ancestry. I am not saying most do. A family named Morales because their ancestors lived near mulberry trees has a perfectly complete, perfectly legitimate explanation for their name. But the historical reality is this. In parts of medieval and early modern Spain, words built on more carried multiple associations simultaneously. Trees, landscape, and the presence of North African Muslim populations that shaped the language, agriculture, architecture, and daily life of Iberia for centuries before being expelled or forcibly converted. The silk industry, the one most directly connected to mulberry cultivation, was one of the industries in which Moorish and Morisco communities were heavily involved in southern Spain. After the expulsion of the Moriscos between 1609 and 1614, when somewhere between 300,000 and 500,000 people were forced out of Spain, the silk industry of Granada collapsed. The knowledge left with the people, Morales sits in that overlap. Trees and moors, geography and identity, a landscape word with a human shadow behind it. I know what some of you are thinking. This feels like a stretch. This feels like people seeing what they want to see in a word. That is a fair concern. And it is exactly why I said at the beginning that a surname is a clue, not a verdict. Morales does not prove Moorish ancestry. It does not even suggest it with any certainty for most families. What it does is sit in a part of the Spanish lexicon where history left multiple fingerprints, and where the honest answer to where does this name come from is, it depends on the family, and to know which story is yours, you need records. That is not a disappointing answer. That is the most honest answer available. Morales gives you a path to investigate, not a conclusion to accept. Number 3. Flores. After the weight of Morales, Flores arrives like a window opening. Flores means flowers. From the Latin flors, the same root that gives English floral flourish, Florida. A beautiful word, a gentle word, a word that feels like it belongs to a completely different register of history than crusades and inquisitions and forced conversions. And for many families, it does. Flores is one of those surnames that is often exactly what it looks like. A family who lived near flowering land. A person from a place named for its flowers. A family who chose the name for its beauty, its natural symbolism, its connection to growth and color and life. But the story of Flores is actually more interesting than simplicity, because Flores teaches us something about surnames that the other names on this list don't. It teaches us that not every Hispanic surname is ancient. This is where people often have the wrong picture. They imagine all Hispanic surnames as medieval artifacts, carved into church walls in the 13th century, passed down in unbroken lines across 800 years. Some are, but many are not. In parts of Latin America, the systematic registration of surnames happened relatively recently. During the colonial period and into the 19th century, indigenous communities, mestizo families, and rural populations who had been identified by other systems were brought into Spanish-style civil registration systems. They needed a surname, a fixed, heritable official surname that the state could record. In those moments, families made choices, or choices were made for them. A colonial administrator with a list of available Spanish surnames might assign one. A priest doing a mass baptism might record whatever came to mind. A family given the option might choose something that felt safe, or beautiful, or neutral. A name that would not attract attention, would not raise questions, would not carry the weight of complicated history. Flores was a natural choice, beautiful, inoffensive, simple to spell and remember, easy to say in any Spanish-speaking region, a name that announced nothing dangerous about its bearer, which means that two families named Flores may have completely different stories. One might trace the name back to a medieval Spanish village named for its flowering hillsides, with documented lineage going back to the 12th century. The other might trace it back to a moment in 19th century Mexico or Colombia or Peru, where a family needed a name, looked at a list, and chose the one that felt like something growing rather than something breaking. That is not a lesser origin. That is a profoundly human one. Not every surname is an ancient castle. Some are flowers picked under pressure. And the families that carried those flowers forward through colonial systems and civil wars and economic migrations and ocean crossings kept the name alive just as faithfully as any medieval dynasty. 3 entries left in the countdown. Number 2 is one of the most common surnames in the entire Hispanic world. You have heard it thousands of times, And buried inside it is a frozen sentence from the early Middle Ages, a sentence that names a man who has been dead for perhaps 1,000 years and whose face no one alive has ever seen. Number 1 is going to redefine what you think you know about the most recognizable Hispanic surname on Earth. And before we get there, I want you to think about something. Every surname on this list, Medina, Guerrero, Cruz, Castillo, Vega, Reyes, Morales, Flores, survived. Through wars and expulsions and forced conversions and ocean crossings and colonial records and civil registrations and immigration papers and census forms and hospital records. Millions of individual moments where a name had to be written down, said aloud, spelled out, confirmed. And every single time it survived. Your surname survived something. You just don't know what yet. Number 2, Rodriguez. Say it the way people say it every day. Rodriguez, fast, automatic. The way you say a word you've heard 10,000 times without actually hearing it. Now say it slowly. Rodriguez, listen to what's inside it. Rodriguez is not a simple surname. Rodriguez is a sentence, a frozen 1,000-year-old sentence that has been repeating itself every single time someone writes that name on a form, a document, a school enrollment paper, a hospital record, a gravestone. The sentence is, this person is the son of Rodrigo. That ending, es, is one of the most important 2 letters in the entire history of Hispanic surnames. It appears in Gonzalez, Hernandez, Martinez, Fernandez, Sanchez, Perez, Velázquez, López, Diaz. Some of the most common surnames in the Spanish-speaking world share this exact construction, and every single one of them is saying the same thing in the same grammatical form. Son of. In the medieval Iberian Peninsula, roughly between the 9th and 13th centuries, surnames were not yet fixed and hereditary the way they are today. A man named Rodrigo might identify his son as Hijo de Rodrigo, son of Rodrigo. Over time, that phrase compressed. Rodrigo's son became Rodriguez. The patronymic, the father's name turned into a family identifier, was so practical, so logical, so easy to understand that it became the dominant system for surname formation across the entire Iberian Peninsula. And then something strange happened. The system froze. What began as a living description, this specific person is the son of this specific man, named Rodrigo, became a permanent, inherited surname. The original Rodrigo died, his son died, his son's son died. Generation after generation passed, each one carrying the same frozen sentence forward into new centuries, new continents, new languages, new worlds. And the sentence kept saying the same thing, son of Rodrigo. But which Rodrigo? That is the question no living Rodriguez can fully answer. There was an original Rodrigo. Somewhere in the medieval Iberian Peninsula, probably between the 9th and 12th centuries, there was a specific man named Rodrigo whose identity was important enough, or simply common enough, that his name became the root of a surname now carried by tens of millions of people. We don't know his face. We don't know his village. We don't know if he was a soldier or a farmer or a merchant or a priest. We don't know if he was kind or cruel, remembered fondly or feared. We don't know if he ever crossed a river or climbed a mountain or looked up at the same stars his descendants would look at centuries later from the other side of an ocean. We only know one thing about him. His name was Rodrigo. And that name, that single first name of a single medieval man, has now outlasted his memory by approximately 1,000 years. Now, the name Rodrigo itself is not Spanish in origin. This is where the second layer opens. Rodrigo comes from the Germanic name Rodrik, composed of 2 elements, Rod, meaning fame or glory, and Rik, meaning power or ruler. It was a name carried by the Germanic peoples, the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths, the Franks, who moved across Europe in the centuries following the collapse of the Roman Empire. The Visigoths controlled the Iberian Peninsula from roughly the 5th to the 8th century. They were not a small footnote. They were the dominant political force in Iberia for 300 years. They brought Germanic names, Germanic law, Germanic vocabulary, and some of those names, Rodrigo, Fernando, Gonzalo, Alvaro, became so embedded in the Iberian naming tradition that they survived the arrival of the Moors, survived the Reconquista, survived the conquest of the Americas, and are still being given to children today. So Rodriguez is not just a Hispanic surname. It is a Germanic name, meaning fame and power, turned into a Spanish patronymic, meaning son of, turned into a hereditary surname, meaning descendant of a forgotten medieval man, turned into one of the most common names on earth. 5 layers of history. One word. Think about what that means for a moment. A modern woman named Rodriguez, living in Chicago or Bogota or Barcelona, carries in her surname the linguistic DNA of a Visigothic naming tradition from 5th century Iberia, filtered through the medieval Spanish patronymic system, crystallized into a hereditary surname somewhere around the 10th to 12th century, carried across the Atlantic by Spanish colonizers in the 16th century, spread through Latin America over 3 centuries of colonial history, and delivered to her, on a birth certificate, in a hospital, in whatever city she was born in, as a simple, ordinary, automatic inheritance. She probably signed it this morning without thinking about it. Rodriguez means, I am the descendant of a man named Rodrigo, who lived 1,000 years ago, whose face no one remembers, whose village may no longer exist, but whose name was important enough, or common enough, to outlast everything else about him. That is what you carry when you carry Rodriguez. A forgotten father, his name is the only thing left. And now, number 1. Garcia. I have been building toward this, because Garcia deserves its own moment. Garcia is everywhere. Spain, Mexico, Colombia, Argentina, the United States, the Philippines. Across the entire Hispanic world and beyond, Garcia is one of the most recognizable surnames on earth. According to data from Spain's National Statistics Institute, Garcia is the most common surname in Spain. In the United States, according to census data, Garcia consistently ranks among the top 10 most common surnames in the country, in a country where Spanish is not even the primary language. There are approximately 10 million people named Garcia in Spain alone. Across Latin America and the Hispanic diaspora, the number reaches into the tens of millions more. Garcia is not just common. Garcia is everywhere. And because it is everywhere, people assume they understand it. They don't. Here is the truth about Garcia that most people, including most people who carry it, do not know. Nobody fully agrees on where it comes from. Not linguists, not historians, not etymologists, not the scholars who have spent careers studying the history of Iberian surnames. After decades of research, the origin of Garcia remains genuinely, substantively debated. Multiple theories exist, none of them commands complete consensus. Let that land for a moment. The most common surname in all of Spain, carried by tens of millions of people, present in virtually every country in the Spanish-speaking world. And its origin is still not fully understood. That is not a minor mystery. That is a profound one. The most compelling theory, and the one with the strongest linguistic evidence, connects Garcia to the Basque language. Basque, Euskara in Basque itself, the language of a people who have lived in the Western Pyrenees, straddling what is now the border between northern Spain and southwestern France, for a period of time that linguists and archaeologists are still working to define. And the reason Basque matters is not just geographic, it is linguistic. Basque is a language isolate. That means it has no known relatives, no demonstrable connection to any other living or historically documented language family on Earth. It is not Indo-European. It is not Semitic. It is not Celtic. It is not Germanic. It is not Latin. It does not belong to the same family as Spanish, French, German, Greek, Arabic, Hebrew, Russian, Hindi, or any other major language you have ever heard of. Basque stands alone. Linguists believe Basque may be a descendant of languages spoken in Western Europe before the Indo-European migration, before Latin, before the Germanic languages, before Celtic spread across the continent. If that is true, Basque may be the last surviving echo of the languages spoken by the people who painted the caves at Altamira and Lascaux, the people who were already in Europe when the ancestors of most modern Europeans arrived. Basque may be, in a very real sense, the oldest layer of European language still spoken today. And Garcia may come from it. Some scholars have proposed connections to Old Basque forms, possible roots meaning young or youth, though the exact reconstruction is debated. The name appears strongly in historical records from northern Iberia, Navarre, the Basque country, Aragon, regions historically connected to Basque linguistic and cultural influence. From those northern regions, Garcia spread southward with the kingdoms of the Reconquista, then westward and southward across Spain, then across the Atlantic with the colonizers, then through 3 centuries of colonial presence into every corner of Latin America. Garcia became ordinary because it survived so completely. Every wave of history that could have eliminated it, the Arab conquest, the Reconquista, the Inquisition, the colonial transformation of the Americas, the independence movements of the 19th century, the mass migrations of the 20th, Garcia survived all of it. In every population, in every country, in every social class, Garcia survived. And underneath that survival, underneath the ordinariness that makes people stop asking questions, is something ancient. Something that may reach back before the Romans arrived in Iberia, before the Visigoths arrived in Iberia, before Al-Andalus, before the medieval kingdoms, before Spain existed as a political concept at all. Garcia may be a name from the world that came before the world we know. Stop here. Don't move past this, because I want you to understand what this means for the people who carry it. If you are named Garcia, your surname is not simple. Your surname is not generic. Your surname is not a placeholder for ordinary Hispanic person. Your surname may be one of the oldest surviving personal names in all of Iberia, a name that was already being used in the mountains of the northern peninsula before the major civilizations we associate with Spanish history had even arrived. The Romans came. Garcia survived. The Visigoths came. Garcia survived. The Moors came. Garcia survived. The Reconquista happened. Garcia survived. The Inquisition happened. Garcia survived. Columbus crossed the Atlantic. Garcia crossed with him, and now it sits on your birth certificate, on your passport, on the forms you fill out automatically without thinking about it. You have been signing one of the oldest names in Europe your entire life, and you probably thought it was just common. 10 surnames, 10 doors. Medina carried a city, not a Spanish city, an Arabic concept. Madna, the city itself, left behind by a culture that ruled parts of the Iberian Peninsula for nearly 800 years. A culture that built Córdoba into one of the largest and most sophisticated cities in medieval Europe. Medina survived the expulsion. It survived the Inquisition. It survived the deliberate erasure of Arab presence from the official story of Spain. It survived because it hid inside a surname. Guerrero remembered a man. We don't know his name beyond the description. We don't know which kingdom he fought for. We don't know if he survived his wars or died in them. What we know is that the description outlasted the man by approximately 1,000 years. Cruz carried faith, and for some families, it may have carried something more complicated than faith. A signal, a declaration, a surname chosen in a moment when choosing the wrong name could cost a family everything. Cruz holds that possibility, carries it forward, lets the question live inside the word. Castillo preserved the shape of a wall. Stone walls, medieval walls. The walls that gave a region its name, Castile, which gave a language its name, Castilian, which became the language spoken today by more than 500 million people on Earth. Vega turned land into identity. Fertile land, riverland, land that grew things. Land shaped in many cases by Arab agricultural engineering. Irrigation systems that transformed the Iberian landscape and whose techniques outlasted the civilization that built them by centuries. And above it all, a star. Vega, the falling eagle, named by Arab astronomers who looked up at the same sky your ancestors looked up at. Reyes carried a crown that didn't belong to most of the people who carried it. In some families, an honest declaration of devotion. In others, possibly, a declaration made under pressure. A crown-shaped surname, worn by families who, almost certainly, never sat on a throne. But survival is its own form of royalty. Morales sat at an intersection, trees and history, mulberry groves and medieval identity. A landscape word with a human shadow behind it. Not a verdict, a question. The question is, what do the records say? Flores reminded us that not every surname needs to be ancient to be meaningful. Some names were chosen. Some were picked in a moment when a family needed something to write on a form. Something safe, something beautiful, something that would not attract the wrong kind of attention. Flowers, chosen under pressure, carried forward through generations. Rodriguez preserved a frozen sentence, son of Rodrigo, a sentence that has been repeating itself, embedded in a surname for approximately 1,000 years. A sentence that names a man whose face is gone, whose village may be gone, whose every other trace has dissolved into the silence of centuries. But the sentence survived, the name of the father survived, and Garcia proved that the most common surname can hide the oldest mystery. Not Spanish in origin, not Latin, not Arabic, not Germanic, possibly Basque, from a language that predates all of them, from a people who were already in Europe before the major civilizations we associate with Western history arrived. Garcia became ordinary because it survived so well. But ordinary is not the same as simple, and familiar is not the same as understood. Now I want to talk to you directly. Not about history, not about etymology. About you. You came into this video with a surname. You have been carrying it your entire life, writing it, signing it, spelling it out loud to strangers, watching it appear on documents that marked the major events of your existence. Birth certificates, school records, marriage licenses, legal papers. You have always known it was yours. But you may not have known what it was. A surname is not decoration. It is not a bureaucratic accident. It is not simply the word that comes after your first name on a form. It is a compressed archive. Packed inside those letters is the record of people who lived before you in ways you cannot fully imagine. People who worked land they didn't own. People who prayed in languages they weren't allowed to speak publicly. People who crossed oceans on ships with no guarantee of arrival. People who stood in front of administrators and priests and census takers and had to say a name, had to commit to a word that would define their family for generations. People who, under pressure, chose something, or had something chosen for them, or carried forward what had been handed to them without question, the way you carried your surname forward without question until right now. Those people are gone. Their faces are gone. Their voices are gone. Their specific, daily human lives, the things they worried about, the things they loved, the things that made them laugh, almost all of it is gone. But the name survived. You survived. You are the living continuation of every person who ever carried your surname. Every generation that kept the name alive brought it one step closer to you. Every child who was given that name, every person who signed it on a document, every family that crossed a border or an ocean or a century while holding on to it, they were building a chain. And you are the current end of that chain, not the last link. The most recent one. Here is what I want you to do. Right now, before you close this video, before you move on to the next thing in your day, write your surname in the comments and tell me which number on this list hit you hardest. Write the number 1 through 10 and write your surname next to it. If you know what country your family comes from, add that too. If you know the village, the region, the story your grandmother told, the version your family has always repeated, leave it there. Because here is what happens in comment sections on videos like this one. Someone in Mexico writes their surname and mentions a village in Jalisco. Someone in Colombia writes the same surname and mentions a village in Antioquia. Someone in Spain writes it and mentions a village in Andalusia. Someone in the United States writes it and says their great-great-grandmother came from somewhere she could never find on a modern map. 4 people, 1 surname, 4 completely different histories, all connected by a word. Your comment might be the thing that helps someone else find the first door into their own family history. Leave it. And if you want to share this video, don't share it generally. Think of one specific person. The cousin who always asks questions about where the family really came from. The friend who just found out they have Spanish ancestry and doesn't know what to do with that information. The parent who carries a surname they've never investigated. Send it directly to that person. 1 share, 1 person, 1 first door opened. Next week, we are going deeper. We are going to look at something that most people in the Hispanic world know exists, but very few people have actually investigated for their own family. The second surname. In the Spanish naming tradition, most people inherit 2 surnames. 1 from the father's line, 1 from the mother's line. We spent this video on the first surname. But the second surname, the maternal line, the one that often gets compressed or dropped in immigration records, The one that disappears first when families adapt to non-Spanish naming systems. The second surname sometimes carries the oldest, most hidden history of all. In several documented cases, the maternal surname is where the Arabic origin lives, where the Jewish heritage survived, where the indigenous name was half translated, half preserved, half disguised in a Spanish form. The second surname is the one that got quieter, which sometimes means it is the one that was hiding something. Next week, we open that door. Your surname is not just a name, it is a clue. It is the most personal piece of history you carry every single day, written on every document that has ever mattered in your life, attached to every record of your existence, spoken aloud at every moment when the world needed to know who you were. You inherited it. Now you know a little more about what you inherited.